Good morning and welcome back to Coffee with Joe. Coffee with Joe is sponsored by You Gotta Believe, a New York-based organization that believes family is the solution for all kids in foster care. This month we have a lot to celebrate. Not only is Father's Day on June 20th, but this entire month is Pride Month. The unfortunate statistic is that over 30% of youth in foster care identify as LGBTQ and 5% is transgender. LGBTQ youth are more likely to suffer from constant harassment in foster care, juvenile justice settings, and homeless shelters. For more information on how you can help a child in foster care find a permanent home, please visit yougotabelieve.org. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Juan Battle to You Gotta Believe. Juan Battle to our program. He is a board member for You Gotta Believe and a father. And he's going to share a little bit about his experience in fatherhood. Hey, Juan.
It's live.
It's live.
Live theater. Nothing's better than it. Yes.
Well, listen, I know a little bit about you, but can you share a little bit about your parenting experience with the folks that may be watching?
Sure. My partner and I, You Gotta Believe is very much invested in moral adoption. And my partner and I have morally adopted about 13 kids who we're still in touch with, who are at this moment dispersed literally all over the world, obviously here in New York, but also in other parts of the world. They've moved and traveled and stayed in touch. And it's been a wonderful journey.
So how old was so you're talking about moral adoption, which means you've provided a forever home to kids.
Yes.
As opposed to me, who's legally adopted them, and I'm legally responsible for them.
and bless you for that.
well, thank you. What was when did that start? How old was the youngest, I guess, when they came to you? And then how did you end up with 13?
Inability. I guess I'm just a girl who can't say no. We started, it was going to be just one, and then it just snowballs. Basically, the agency keeps calling, and if you don't say no, they will drop them at your door. But it started rather quickly, as a matter of fact, when we inquired and looked into it. From the time we made the first phone call to this organization, it was a foreign exchange organization. And we became known as dealing with the more difficult kids for whatever reason. And so from the time we called to the time we had a placement, it was less than a week, truth be told. And then it just snowballed from there. So not only was it the kids who were through foreign exchange, but then, connections and friends of theirs. We also did kinship care. My nephew stayed with us from DC. Came to stay with us here in New York for a little while when he was having his own journey. So it's been a rather interesting tapestry of what makes our family look the way it does.
Wow, and how do they break down in gender and age now?
We have 8 boys and 5 girls. We have 8 grandchildren. The ages range from early 40s to mid 20s.
Wow. So my youngest is 14. He's 15. He'll be 16. And my oldest is 30. And I am expecting a 16-year-old, hopefully any day now, through an interstate. So he doesn't live in the state that I live in. So we've got to wait. It's a little longer process, but there are kids all over the country that
Yes.
need homes. How did that lead you to You Gotta Believe?
I was actually recruited from the chair of the board, who found my name on the list of another board, another organization that I was serving on the board at the time and still am. And she saw that I lived in New York, and so she reached out to me. And I was busy at the time, so I was unable to join the board. I was on other boards, and so I did a small project with You Gotta Believe, and then eventually, my calendar opened up, and I ended up on the board, and have been there for definitely less than a year. I think just a few months.
Now, when she found you, when she discovered that you existed, did she know that you had your
No,
parenting situation? So
no,
it was really perfect.
it was indeed.
So it probably blew her mind when she found out that you had provided a forever home for 13 youth.
I'm sure she was happy to tick more than one box by getting me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mentioned this statistic in the intro that
Mhm.
30% of children in foster care identify as LGBTQ and 5% as transgender. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that number needs some serious air quotes around it, because when you say 30% identify, the question becomes how many don't identify yet still are. That's the first thing. The other thing to keep in mind is that's at a particular moment in time. Sexuality is fluid. And so I would argue both of those numbers, if you looked at it over the life course, would be much larger.
Yeah, I would agree. I worked for a different organization in New York City. We're running a homeless and runaway youth program. And at the time, we were really targeting youth that were on the west side of the village at the piers. And those kids were involved in sex trafficking and selling of themselves. Really high risk kids. And then we had kids from all over the world who were coming. Those that did identify had horrible stories about basically being thrown away by their parents,
Sure.
that they didn't belong in their families or their communities, and so they just hit the streets.
Sure.
So there are lots of kids around us that we might not be aware of that are not just LGBTQ, but throwaways and not belonging to families. And so that's why I think You Gotta Believe does a fantastic job at least informing people that those kids exist, and then providing a pathway for people that might be interested in opening their homes for these kids.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is, not only might there be a disconnect between the numbers that we have and what's happening in reality, there's also a disconnect between those who are gathering the data and those for whom the data is about. What do you mean, Juan? Well, sexuality, like race, is rooted in identity politics.
Mm-hmm.
And so now, if you were born in the generation I was born in the generation that you were born in, if your mom was white and your dad was black, you were considered black, period. There's no conversation, a la Barack Obama.
Mm-hmm.
However, now we use this term biracial rather fluidly. Well, that's a generation specific terminology and nomenclature. The same thing is true with LGBTQ. There are lots of kids, in their teens and early 20s, and definitely preteens, who've totally rejected the identity politics around sexuality. That language just doesn't work. It doesn't reflect their lived experience. So I think that, as I oftentimes say, numbers don't lie, just people who use them. And so I think that we need to be, numbers are binary.
Right.
So I think we need to be careful for those of us who are, shall we say, midwives in this field of, having people transition from one community to the other, realizing that hanging on to statistics that aren't necessarily accurate can be just as detrimental as it can be liberating.
That's very interesting, and I would totally agree. What advice would you have for any LGBTQ persons who are interested in fostering or adopting?
What, vice or advice?
Advice.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
was like, I'm really for an 11 o'clock show. Okay. The do it. The Nike line of just do it. And even if you're not ready to do it, at least inquire. You're never going to be ready. I remember my mother, Jazz is our oldest, is the first kid we got. And like I said, it was less than a week between the time we made a phone call and Jazz was in our house. And so it was like quick. And we're like, oh hell. And Jazz was like 16, 17 at the time. And so I called my mother and I said, Mom, you're not going to believe this. And so I told her what had happened. And I said, any advice? You raised 5 kids, any advice? And she paused and she said, no matter what you do, they're going to blame you. So enjoy it. The best parenting advice I ever got. She said,
oh my God, I feel that every day. I feel that. but I have found out that because most of the people that are my support group and friends don't have adopted children. They just laugh at me and say, "Did you just figure that out?" So it's not specific to foster care or adoption. It's sort of your inauguration into parenting. And there's a line that I don't know where I ever got it, and probably my parents. I tell them, I don't care if you're mad at me today. You're going to be grateful for me when you get older. So, and I am a person who only adopts teens. So it's, I'm getting them right in the thick of things.
And the teen years are fun.
Oh yes, they're adorable.
Oh my God, the hormones alone. Oh my God. Oh my goodness.
Well, you were braver than I. I would only adopt male children, only because I don't know that this is true, and certainly friends of mine have told me that they think it's ridiculous. I only adopt male children because I think it takes a man to bring a male child into manhood, and I also believe that about a female child. It takes a woman to lead a woman into womanhood, and probably the most true thing about my decision is that I'm petrified. So,
Well, it's interesting. I think you need a loving parent to bring a loving child into loving adulthood. I guess I'm less invested in the gender. I'm not saying it's a bad thing or wrong. I'm just, and how we ended up with Mari, our oldest daughter, was she and some others were actually in a situation that they had to get out of immediately. And so, really immediately. And so the agency called us and they had 4 kids and all teenagers. And it was here in New York. And so they called to say, could we keep one until they could find, they were going to basically disperse them around. But could we keep one until they could find a permanent placement for her? We said yes. They drove by here to drop off Mari, but they had just come from the place she was at where it was not a good situation. And so they were in the living room. The kids were with the social worker processing the hell they had just come out of. And, Mike and I walked into the kitchen. My partner's name is Michael. Mike and I walked into the kitchen, and without even saying anything to each other, we just looked at each other. And we were like, we have the space. Yes, the kids can stay here. So because at the time the social worker was on the phone trying to find some place for some of the other kids to go, and so we're like, leave them here until you can find a place to go. And they did, and they found places for the 3, but it was clear that Mari, there was just a connection like within the first couple of days, and so it's like, okay, so fine, she stays.
Yeah.
And then the second set of girls, the point is, what you call bravery was not bravery, it was just stupidity.
Well, maybe it's just my cowardness, because I would never, tell anybody not to adopt a female child if they were a male. I'm just petrified of it. So,
as were we. But you talked about friends. And I encourage this for all parents. Period. It really, really does take a village. And we had a lot of friends who did not have children, so clearly lived vicariously through ours, and we let them. It's like,
yep.
And so we had female friends. Even though I'm gay, I didn't get the shopping gene. I find shopping painfully boring. But I had female friends who would take the girls shopping and would go do facials and all that carrying on that I could have cared less about.
Right.
We would go on vacation together, and we would do cruises. And when the cruise would stop at a certain port, the female friends would take the girls and would go off. And they're like, "Juan, are you okay with that?" I was like, "Look, get them back on the boat by the time the boat leaves. Otherwise, they're gonna be Mexican because we're gonna leave them right here." But other than that, I didn't care. But so I encourage people to take advantage of that, and.
Oh yeah, I have my new potential son is a fisher. I don't know nothing about fishing.
Oh.
So luckily I'm in an area where I probably can find a dozen people within a block of me who would help. So I think calling your resources and looking for the resources that are in community are absolutely pivotal to everybody's mental health.
Exactly. It makes it easier. I never felt a need to do it all on my own, and I don't think Michael felt the same way either. We drew in. It's the house, and even now, as a side note, we still have, because the kids are grown and gone and all over the place. We still have house reunions where people, where the kids come back here, or we meet in other locations. We met 2 years ago, was one of our big reunions. We all met in Berlin, and had rented a Airbnb or whatever it was called, this huge space, and we collided there and spent about a week and had a wonderful time. And we were going to do here last year, but of course COVID. And I think our next one is going to be Portugal.
Look at that, a regular family activity. Right.
As your kids get older, their wants become less, but the price becomes more.
Well,
it's only big ticket items they start asking you for.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I could talk to you forever, but we have time limits.
Okay.
So I really appreciate you joining us and being part of this conversation today.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
But before you go,
oh yes,
we have a question of the day.
Oh my goodness.
Well, Peter from Peekskill wants to know, how much should you give a child when they lose a tooth?
How do they lose the tooth?
That's a good question.
That's my question. All of our kids had their teeth by the time they got to me. How much did you give a child and lose their tooth? $1. I have no idea.
I have no idea either. My youngest was 13, and when they got here, they didn't believe in any tooth fairy. So, but you know what? I tell you what, that's a good. The answer to that is ask the community around you. Ask your friends
exactly
what they do.
Also, be careful. I know we have a time limit, but really, really quick. Be careful about which friends you ask. So, speaking of tooth fairies, I worked at a summer camp for many, many years. A kid's tooth falls out. A counselor, the kid's crying. The counselor tells the kid to put his tooth under his pillow. The kid says, "Why?" He says, "So the tooth fairy will bring you, a gift or something." And the kid was 8 or 9 years old, crying, saying, "There is no tooth fairy." And the counselor says to the kid, "I know there's a tooth fairy. I hung out with him in a bar in the East Village."
We have a comment here. $5 is the going rate.
For a tooth?
That's my response too. That's from Teresa. Thank you, Teresa. $5. So I'm glad my kids have all their teeth.
There you go. There you go. Well, again, thank you for inviting me. I really do appreciate it. It was wonderful talking to you.
Not at all. Not at all. Thank you. So you've been watching Coffee with Joe. Please join us every first Wednesday of the month for more information about foster care and adoption. And please go to yougotabelieve.org if you want to find out information about how to get started on your process of bringing a kid towards a forever home.